Human actions often affect ecosystems and biodiversity. For example, this albatross bird died after eating plastic garbage that was found floating in the ocean. Biodiversity is simply the definition of the variety of life on Earth. And biologists say that maintaining biodiversity is very important, since, as we know from this class, all organisms must interact with each other. Today's lecture will explore threats to biodiversity. The first term is extinction. Extinction means that the last individual of a species has perished, such as the dodo bird, which recently went extinct in the last centuries. Many species on our planet are currently close to extinction today. For example, groups of animals such as amphibians and a group of plants called the gymnosperms are especially hard hit in terms of losing lots of biodiversity around the world. Our next term is an endangered species. Endangered species have a high risk of extinction in the near future. Another term is a vulnerable species. These are species that are likely to become extinct in a more distant future. However, both of these types of species are species that we must watch and seek to protect, and that means we need to change our human behaviors. So how do human actions cause this loss of biodiversity? This is the type of question that a conservation biologist would ask. A conservation biologist would study the preservation of biodiversity found around the world. The map on your screen shows some worldwide biodiversity hotspots, in which, based upon the environment, the biodiversity is much higher than other places in the world. And right here in the state of California, we call it the California Floristic Province, and we have some of the highest biodiversity in North America. This chapter will explore the 5 main causes for the loss of biodiversity around the world. And the 5 main causes are: number 1, habitat loss; number 2, pollution; number 3, global climate change; number 4, invasive species; and number 5, overexploitation. Before we get started, let's do our first challenge question to make sure we understand this material for the exam. What is the opposite of a species extinction? Your first choice is the discovery of a previously unknown species. Your next choice is the evolution of a new species. Your next choice is the death of the last individual of a species. And your final choice is the appearance of a new mutation in a species. Pause the lecture if you don't want to hear the answer yet. And the answer is the opposite of a species extinction is the evolution of a new species. When you're studying for the exam, make certain you understand what conservation biology is. So now we can break down these 5 causes for the loss of biodiversity worldwide. And our first cause is habitat loss. Habitat loss is one of the number 1 ways that biodiversity is threatened around the world. For example, grasslands and forests are often cleared and destroyed to make room for farms or for cities in which the growing human populations need to live. Deforestation is one of the things that contributes to habitat loss. Deforestation is defined as the removal of trees from an area of land, and it has several implications for the health of that area. First, forests provide habitat for many species, including other types of plants, animals, fungus, and bacteria. Another major implication is that trees absorb large amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and also release oxygen and water into the atmosphere. Urbanization eliminates many habitats and affects nearby habitats, especially due to erosion from runoff. On our screen, we can see a picture of a rainforest that was cleared for urban development in these mountains. Together, farming, deforestation, and urbanization are shrinking Earth's grasslands and forests. At the same time, deserts are expanding around the world, largely due to global climate change. North Africa is a prime example. 60,000 years ago, Northern Africa was not an extensive desert, but today it's a huge desert on our planet. Humans manipulate water for recreation, for agriculture, and to support human populations living in dry cities. In addition, humans have to manipulate water for flood control. All of these play a big role in maintaining quality of life for humans, but it is important to note that it comes at a cost to aquatic habitat for many types of organisms. On our screen, we can see a map of the California Aqueduct Project, a series of canals that transports water from Northern California, which typically gets lots of water, down to Southern California, which typically is very dry and has a very long drought every year. This golf course in Palm Springs is way out of place in the desert, and yet humans divert huge amounts of water to maintain golf courses and parks in places where they usually would not be. As you can imagine, it takes a huge amount of water to keep a golf course alive in the desert, and that comes at the expense of freshwater aquatic ecosystems in Northern California. Damming rivers also alters ecosystems. Now, it is essential for current human populations that we do have dams, because without dams, we would not have reservoirs, and without reservoirs, we wouldn't have a place to store our fresh drinking water. However, these dams do change nutrient cycling in the river. They prevent fish from migrating, and the dams eliminate waterfalls and wetland habitats. Both San Mateo and San Francisco County get their water from the Oceansee Dam in Yosemite National Park. Here's our next challenge question. How might the expansion of a city cause the loss of nearby biodiversity? Your first choice is land must be cleared to make room for new buildings. Your next choice is water needed for homes and industry may be removed from nearby habitats. Your next choice is humans release toxic chemicals into the air, water, and soil. And your final choice is all of the above are likely. Pause the lecture if you don't want to hear the answer yet. It's all of the above. When you're studying for the exam, make certain that you can describe which human activities account for most of the loss of terrestrial habitat. Number 2 in our list of contributing factors to biodiversity loss is pollution. Pollution is defined as any chemical, physical, or biological change in the environment that harms living organisms. Water pollution is just one type of pollution, and it threatens aquatic life in several serious ways. We've learned about biogeochemical cycles and how there is a cycling of nutrients in a living system. Well, nitrogen and phosphorus are some essential elements to living things, but too much nitrogen or too much phosphorus can actually be harmful to the system. As these chemicals run off the land from excess fertilizers, they can change aquatic ecosystems. In a process called eutrophication, excessive nutrients ultimately lead to oxygen-poor water that cannot sustain much life. On our screen is a picture of the Florida coastline in which eutrophication is occurring and algal blooms have completely taken over these beachfront properties. Eutrophication occurs in a series of steps. We know first off we have to have nutrients that run off into the water. When nutrients are high in the water, the algae thrive, they bloom, and they grow. However, algae live and algae die. And when so much of this blooming algae dies, the decomposers are so happy. They have so much food. The decomposers can carry out cellular respiration and eat all that dead algae. But we know that cellular respiration uses oxygen. And so in eating all the algae, these decomposers use up all the oxygen in the water. Lack of oxygen kills fish and other oxygen-dependent organisms living in the system. Nutrient runoff from agriculture and fertilizers causes a huge dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico every single year. On our map, we can see how all of these freshwater rivers travel across our country through some of the most fertile farmlands in the United States. But because many farmers use way too many chemicals, those chemicals run off into the rivers and ultimately end up in the Gulf, where this dead zone is produced every single September. On our screen, we can see a picture of some water that's highly polluted with trash. But these waters are more polluted than just the trash that's in them. Water can leach chemicals from plastics and from other types of garbage. And these chemicals can biomagnify in ecosystems. Air pollution also causes many types of damage. For example, here's a large city that's plagued by smog, which is defined as visible air pollution. Burning fossil fuels release both sulfur and nitrogen oxides into the atmosphere, where they mix with water to form acids. These acids then fall back down to Earth in the form of precipitation. We call this acid deposition, which really is referred to as acid rain. Persistent chemicals called CFCs destroy ozone in the upper atmosphere. Ozone is a gas that blocks UV radiation in the upper atmosphere. The ozone layer is very important for helping us regulate the temperature of our Earth. But with a growing hole in the ozone layer over Antarctica, it is leading to catastrophic effects on our climate around the globe. And it's directly related to chemicals that many decades ago we didn't know any better, and we pump those into the atmosphere without any regulation. Here's our next question. The seasonal dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is caused by a lack of oxygen in the water. Which of the following practices is most likely to make this situation worse? Your first choice is dumping plastics into the water. Your next choice is reversing deforestation. Your next choice is releasing more CFCs into the atmosphere. Your next choice is letting more nitrogen and phosphorus enter the water. And your final choice is killing mosquitoes with toxic insecticides. Pause the lecture if you don't want to hear the answer yet. The best answer is letting more nitrogen and phosphorus enter the water. Because remember, it's all about fertilizers that are making the algae bloom, the algae die, and then they get broken down by decomposers who use up all the oxygen in the water. When we're studying for the exam, make certain that we can describe how pollutants affect aquatic ecosystems around the world. Our third factor that contributes to a loss of biodiversity worldwide is global climate change. Greenhouse gases warm the Earth's surface. They do so indirectly through a process called the greenhouse effect, which is an increase in the surface temperature on Earth caused by heat-trapping gases in the upper atmosphere. Carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases prevent heat from escaping the Earth's atmosphere. It's similar to how glass keeps heat from escaping a greenhouse. Even in the winter, a glass greenhouse can remain very warm. Our planet is regulated similar to a greenhouse, except we have a layer of gases in the upper atmosphere. Now, this carbon dioxide gas, if it builds up too much, then it can cause problems, right? Too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. And if too much carbon dioxide is released from the burning of fossil fuels, for example, then not enough of this heat can escape, and then it gets trapped on Earth, leading to heating in some parts of our globe. During the last 100 years, there have been direct correlations between temperatures and carbon dioxide concentration. And we can see that as the carbon dioxide concentration goes up, so has the overall mean temperatures around the world. Already, polar ice sheets are melting and the sea levels are rising as a result of these huge quantities of water that used to be stored in ice, and now they have entered into our oceans around the world. And this global climate change and these rising oceans will directly affect the San Francisco Bay. Many areas around the bay are at or even slightly below sea level. Many of our highways, the SFO airport, many different locations will be directly affected by sea level rise. Rising temperatures is not the only problem, however. Rising carbon dioxide concentration also directly affects ocean ecosystems. Carbon dioxide causes ocean waters to become more acidic because that carbon dioxide mixes with water to form a weak acid. And this weak acid, while it's weak, can still completely devastate many marine systems, such as coral reefs. Even the warm tropics are vulnerable to climate change in unexpected ways. We might think that an area that has become accustomed to hot temperatures wouldn't care much if it gets a little bit hotter, because those organisms love those warm, wet, tropical rainforests. However, we're seeing just the opposite. Higher temperature increases can lead to more evaporation of water from the ocean. And if we have more evaporation, we have more clouds, we have more fog, and it's covering some of these higher elevations in Costa Rica with more or less year-round fog. Year-round fog means year-round moisture, and that's causing fungus and other types of organisms to wipe out species of harlequin frogs because they get susceptible to this disease when there's so much moisture constantly in the air. Here's our next challenge question. If we increase the rate at which we burn tropical rainforests, we can expect that global climate change will reverse itself because a large living tree releases so much carbon dioxide. Your next choice is reverse itself because a large living tree consumes so much carbon dioxide. Your next choice is accelerate because a large living tree releases so much carbon dioxide. And your final choice is accelerate because a large living tree consumes so much carbon dioxide. So this one has us remember cellular respiration and photosynthesis, those processes we learned about earlier in the semester. So please pause the lecture if you don't want to hear the answer yet. The answer is, if we increase the rate at which we burn tropical rainforests, we can expect that global climate change will accelerate because a large living tree consumes so much carbon dioxide. when we're studying for the exam, make certain we can describe how Earth's climate has changed during the past century. Our fourth factor that contributes to a loss of biodiversity worldwide is exotic invaders. Sometimes a non-native species spreads widely in its new habitat and in many cases becomes invasive. Invasive species often harm the environment. For example, here we can see a picture of gypsy moths that are chowing down on these leaves and wiping out the plant populations, or a species of Japanese vine that is wiping out forests on the east coast of the United States. An example of an animal that becomes invasive is the zebra mussel. Invasive zebra mussels have crowded out many native mussel species in North America and have changed the water chemistry, affecting fish and aquatic plants in many places, including right here in the San Francisco Bay. Our fifth and final factor that contributes to a loss of biodiversity is overexploitation. Humans sometimes cause species extinctions by overexploiting those species in the wild. That means humans harvest a species faster than it can reproduce. Examples of overexploitation include overhunting of terrestrial species, such as tigers, and overharvesting of marine organisms, such as commercial fishing practices. Improved management practices can help us recover these populations before they get overharvested to the brink of extinction. When you're studying for the exam, make certain that you can describe what features characterize an invasive species. Now, while we learn about all of the terrible things happening on our planet, we can reverse the damage. It is not too late to lose hope, to act up, and to change our lives. Some biodiversity may be recoverable. Both awareness and government action can help save endangered species. For example, our very national bird, the bald eagle, was on the brink of extinction because of human activities in the 1960s, but thanks to the Endangered Species Act and lots of protections that were enacted in the 1970s, the bald eagle populations around our country have recovered. Preserving critical habitat, reversing habitat destruction, and helping organisms bypass degraded habitats are among the best efforts to both maintain and restore biodiversity. On your screen, you can see what's called a fish ladder. It's a funny-looking thing that allows fish to swim past a dam, so that as fish are trying to swim upstream to reproduce, it allows them to get past that dam, which would be considered a degraded habitat. Biotechnology might also have a role in helping us recover biodiversity. For example, DNA from preserved specimens might be useful in bringing extinct species back to life. While this does seem like science fiction today, in the near future, it could be reality as scientific advances are discovered. Scientists might make ordinary citizens aware of threats to biodiversity, but it is truly up to everyone to change their lifestyles in order to better clean and preserve our environment. Our final challenge question for this chapter: which conservation strategy is likely to save the most different species at once? Your first choice is setting aside protected habitats. Your next choice is providing corridors for animals to bypass degraded habitats. Your next choice is cloning extinct animals. Your next choice is passing laws that protect popular endangered species. And your final choice is eradicating invasive species. Pause the lecture if you don't want to hear the answer. The answer is setting aside protected habitat. By providing habitat for animals and plants and other organisms on our planet. It is the number one way to provide conservation strategies and maintain biodiversity on our planet.